All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. First, thanks to Maria for setting up these sessions for people that are planning to apply to graduate school, especially this fall. Although, from the names I'm seeing who are on this webinar tonight, I recognize a couple who may not be applying till next year. So, never bad to do your homework ahead of time. So, it's a good thing. Um, Also, just for your knowledge. And some of you are probably already well aware there's a big presidential debate on later tonight. So if you are curious to see the presidential candidates, go ahead and tune in later tonight. So you've already had some presentations in this series. You've learned a little bit from Dr. Roop about the application process and kind of the nuts and bolts of it. I think you learned from Dr. Bielefeld some important things about how to request letters of recommendation. Um, those are really good pieces of advice. And I'm here tonight to talk about the thing that has been making all of you sick to your stomach, and that is writing the personal statement. Um, I've been talking to students about this for quite a number of years now, and every single person comes in and says, this is the single hardest part of doing the applications for grad school, is figuring out what to say in a personal statement. And as you know, depending on the school you're applying to, they may want a personal statement, a complete personal statement. They may just have a series of very specific essays that they want you to write to, or they might have both. Some programs want both a regular personal statement. Some programs then also want the answers to specific essay questions. And of course, because they don't want to make it particularly easy, I mean, that's not the reason they do it. Every school has different essay questions. Sometimes there's overlap, but sometimes some of these questions kind of, you're like, oh, I hadn't thought of that question before. So we're going to sort of talk through all of that, and I'm going to try to leave plenty of time for questions. If you watched the one I did last year already, you are probably not going to learn a whole lot new this year because my advice has not changed in a year. So I will go ahead and talk you through the points that I think are worth making when you're thinking about writing a general personal statement. So the very first and most important consideration when you're writing anything, whether it's a personal statement or whether it's a text to your best friend, the most important consideration in writing anything is think about the audience who's going to be reading it. So the things you might say to your girlfriend in a text message are obviously not going to be appropriate for your personal statement. I mean, and that's not what I mean here. But every time you write anything, you should think about your audience. Having an ability to write well, to write clearly and articulately, it's a superpower. And it's one that you should use only for good. So you should think about who's my audience. That's absolutely number one. So, in the case of your personal statement, who's going to be reading these? Well, the people that are going to be reading them are people like me. They're faculty members at the universities that you're applying to. Um, Particularly really good programs, but basically every program is going to get a lot of applications. So you are writing for an academic person who's going to be reading a lot of it, of these applications and a lot of these personal statements. So you want to make sure that when the person who is reading your application gets to the end of your personal statement, this person doesn't say, oh yeah, Jane Smith, she did a whole lot of things. She listed them all in her personal statement, and I honestly can't remember any of them. Right? That would be a bad outcome for your personal statement. You want to write a personal statement that people are going to actually remember. So I think, as I have said in the past, and I will say again, there's a lot of advice out there about how to write these personal statements for graduate school. Much of it is very bad advice. One piece of advice that's out there is very good advice, and it's this: do not write your resume. You have to submit a resume anyway to most of these programs and to the SIDCAST site. You certainly should in any case. Don't write your resume. They can read your resume. Instead, you want a personal statement that's going to go and pull together not every experience you've ever had, but a small set of them that are related in some way, because your personal statement needs to have sort of an overarching theme. And that theme is a story about you. It's not the entire story of you, but it's a story about you. And you guys who had me in 4440, you know I think everything's a story, because everything is. But when I say that about personal statements, I don't mean a story like, I went into the clinic and the first time little Johnny's cochlear implant was turned on and his eyes sparkled, I was transported. Not because there's anything wrong with that story. That's a great story, but it's not a story about you. It's a story in an anecdotal kind of sense. When I say that your personal statement is the story of you, what I mean is it's written in the way that a really good thematic essay is written. The first paragraph expresses the theme of this essay. A lot of times, that first paragraph is how you got interested in speech and hearing in the first place. Sometimes it's not that, but a lot of times that's what it is. Then you choose from among your experiences, both in and out of the classroom, things that you can write about that kind of relate back to that theme. So the theme has to run through all the paragraphs in your personal statement. And when you get to the end, the last paragraph talks about your goals and aspirations for your future career and how whatever you talked about in the first paragraph in that theme, how that brought you to the point where you are now, which is ready to move on to the next phase of your educational progress. So that's what I mean by the basic structure of an essay. You need to structure it in a way that when the reader gets to the end of it, they say, oh yeah, Jane Smith, she's the one that raised Arabian horses, and somehow that turned into a passion for audiology, which never say never, it might happen, right? So, but the reader walks away going, I remember this person, I remember this student, because they wrote about a thing that was a theme. And I can say in 5 words what that student's theme was. So that's what I mean when I talk about it needs to tell a story. It needs to be thematically coherent and consistent. It is not a chronological story of first I did this, and then I did this, and then I did this. It's not that. Unless you say, first I did this, which raised more questions than it answered for me. And so then I decided to do this second thing because it was able to answer many of my questions. And so that kind of chronological you can talk about, but everything needs to be related in this overall personal statement. Another general thing about any kind of communication: don't say anything that isn't true. We have an amazing ability to sniff out when you are being insincere. It just jumps off the page at us. So don't say, for example, that you're dying to do a PhD if you're not dying to do a PhD. Don't say that you really want to specialize in AAC because the program you're applying to has an AAC specialization, unless it's true. We can tell if you say something that's not true in your essay. It's just something about how it rings when we read it. So don't say anything that isn't true. Be absolutely straightforward. Another thing you want to think about is again about the people that are reading your essay. We are academics. I talked to a lot of you about resumes versus vitas, and I do that to make a point. So, the resume that you will write as part of your application to graduate school has to look like a business resume. It will list positions you've held, it will list jobs you've done, it will list volunteer activities you've engaged in. And for each one, you will provide a brief description of what that thing was. And business resumes are full of verbs. I overcame, I oversaw, I supervised, I served, so everything's a verb because when you're describing what you did, you're going to use a lot of verbs. Academic resumes, the curriculum vitae or vita, are not like that at all. They're all nouns, they're just the facts. Position title, location, years. Position title, location, years. Never a description of what you did in the position. Your publications, author's names, year, title of article, title of journal, volume and pages. Never a description of what the article's about. That's not to say that you need to write your resume like an academic vita. It's more to help you see into the head of those academics who are going to be reading your personal statement. Vitas are written the way they're written because academics believe their accomplishments should speak for themselves. And so if you have to spend a lot of time beefing them up and talking about how great you are, there's something that feels a little not right about that. So a certain humility of tone is also very, very helpful when you're writing your personal statement. And this is where we go back to talking about your stomach, because all that advice out there that tells you that you should talk about how great you are in your many great characteristics and qualities, and I have excellent time management skills. It makes your stomach hurt to write that stuff. You don't want to write that stuff. And I will tell you, we don't want to read that stuff. Now, if you said, you know, my deployment in Afghanistan when I was in the military forced me to learn excellent time management skills, that's a different statement, right? That's I'm so great I have time management skills, but I learned something from my deployment in Afghanistan. And believe it or not, I've actually had a student who was deployed in Afghanistan and wrote about that in her personal statement. So that humility of tone is more not about how many awesome things you did, but how grateful you are for the opportunities to get involved in these various things. And most importantly, what did it teach you? What did you learn from it? Because again, audience is academics, right? We always want to know what you've learned. We're very excited when you've learned something. So talk about things you've done, but more from a tone that has more humility to it. And you will find that your stomach will hurt a lot less. So be thinking about the various things that you've engaged in, whether those are paid employment, whether those are volunteer positions, whether you've held a leadership role in a student organization or some outside organization, those kinds of things. There are lessons to be learned from all of them. And think about those in terms of what have I learned as a result of doing X, whatever X is. And then you will find it'll be much easier to write about it. Okay. Um, what kinds of things resonate with the reader? So, some things that are probably true about you, that are true about every single student who applies to any graduate program in our discipline. Everybody on this call wants to help people. Um, that's like table stakes, right? You sort of have to want to help people to go into speech language pathology or audiology, right? It's kind of necessary. So the simple statement that you've always wanted to help people is not going to distinguish you from every other student who's writing. But if your desire to be helpful goes back a long way into middle school or high school, and you did something a little unusual with respect to it. Like I had a student once who came from a small town, and she realized that there were no clothing drives for underserved people in her entire county. So she organized an annual winter coat drive when she was still in high school. And she continues to go back every fall and work in that annual coat drive so that people in her county who are economically disadvantaged can get warm winter coats. So that is an example of something that's like, well, that's a little different. Nobody else has ever done that. And sometimes the things that you have done in your past seem like they're not really very related to speech and hearing or how you got here or anything else. Because I've had to laugh over the years at different students. Once I had a student who came in and she said, I'm having real trouble writing this essay. And I said, well, tell me about you. And she said, well, my parents immigrated to the United States from Russia when I was 10 years old. They moved to Columbus, Ohio, and they dropped me down into the Columbus public school system, and I didn't speak any English. And I said, and you think that's not related to your later interest in pursuing something that is highly focused on communication difficulties and disorders? And she went, oh, well, I never thought about that. And it's like, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. So I've had students come in and say, well, I was actually a dance major. I'm just picking up these prereqs at the end of my undergraduate to go on in speech pathology. So none of anything I've done up to this point is at all related to my desire to go into speech language pathology. And I said, well, tell me about dance. And she said, well, what do you mean? And I said, so what's your favorite kind of dance? And she said, well, I like, jazz interpretive dance. And I said, so what are you trying to do when you are dancing for an audience? And she said, well, I'm trying to tell them something. I'm trying to communicate with them through my movements. And I said, and you think that that doesn't have a connection to trying to communicate, which is one of the big things that speech and hearing professionals are involved in? And she went, oh, I never thought about it. So I tell you a couple of those stories because of a fact that I've observed many, many times, and it's this. You're trying to think about your life while you're right in the middle of living it. And in order to write this personal statement, you almost have to have an out of body experience, right? You have to get outside your body and kind of hover over your life and say, what pieces tie together? How did I get to this point? Did I always want to be a speech language pathologist? Or did I want to be something else? And something right turned me to become to want to become a speech language pathologist. And how were things that I have done in my life, how did those lead up to me deciding to go into this field? And you might be surprised because things are more connected than you think. Last year, I had a student who told me that the thing she was passionate about outside of wanting to go into speech language pathology was crochet. And I said, well, tell me about crochet. Well, the first thing is she liked to crochet. And I told her that for my book club in my personal life, I was leading a discussion of a book about an octopus. It's a really good book, by the way. It's called Remarkably Bright Creatures. So this student shows up the next day with a crocheted octopus and gave it to me. And I said, so tell me about this. And she said, well, crochet for me has always been the way I communicated with my mother because she taught me how. And my mother didn't understand what speech language pathology was. So when I was crocheting a larynx for Dr. Bay, because yes, she did, I took it and I showed it to my mom, and I was able to show her parts of the larynx that I had done in this crochet model. And then all of a sudden, my mom was much more interested in what I wanted to go into. So she went on to say that she'd used crochet. She was working in a nursing home, and she got the nursing home to give her the position of crafts director for the residents. And so she would take in art supplies or crochet supplies, and people would come. And she said, it's just a way of communicating with people. That's what she wound up writing her personal statement about. I guarantee you, no one else has ever written a personal statement that's about crochet before. But she did a masterful job, and now she's in graduate school. So don't rule out things that you have done that might have given you some insights that are going to make you a better speech language pathologist, or that serve to get you to where you are right now. And not all of those things are in speech and hearing. Now, by all means, if you held a position on NISLA's executive board, or actually a leadership position in pretty much any student organization, you learned a lot about leadership. And think about, what did I learn about leadership? What skills do I have now? Or did I just learn that leadership is really hard and that it takes a lot of work? It's a lot more work than it looks like it is. So think about your experiences. Think about what you've done. Think about what's been most important to you. I am always super impressed when I talk to students and they tell me the things that they have been most passionate about during their undergraduate time. Now, some of you are going to say, well, I've had to work 30 hours a week because I'm putting myself through school. I don't have those outside experiences. I didn't get a chance to be a leader in an organization. I didn't get a chance to do a bazillion volunteer hours. The world does not end. You probably learned a ton of things about responsibility and about how to get along with very diverse colleagues in your work environment. And so think about the things you've learned as a result of doing that paid employment that you might be having to spend a lot of time at to put yourself through school. Those things turn out to be kind of memorable, and memorable in a good way. So when I say those things might be memorable, I'm going to segue into, what are graduate programs looking for in students? Well, number one, we're looking for evidence of academic excellence. But I will tell you that an awful lot of students who apply to graduate programs have pretty lofty GPAs. Having a high GPA alone is not going to distinguish you. It's very helpful and it looks great, but it by itself doesn't really go above that bar where they are looking for students with particular characteristics. Um, we are looking for students who are passionate about the field. Well, how do you show that you're passionate about the field other than saying, I am passionate about this field? Well, of course you are. I once had a student who said, I went out and read 4 ASHA position papers off the ASHA website. And I'm really excited about this one. And I've decided that it is one of the most important areas that ASHA could go forward in the future. And I thought, well, that was pretty cool. Another student wrote about um, overcoming cancer not once, but twice. Definitely an unusual story, and one that, talk about overcoming adversity. That story tells volumes. Um, Persistence and dedication. So maybe it took you more years to get through your undergrad program because you had illnesses or people in your family had illnesses. Um, Dealing with those things, particularly if you had to take on a big role, those things teach you a lot as well about persistence, about dedication. So when I was an undergrad, I am one of 6 siblings. And when I was an undergrad, my father died when I was a sophomore in college. My mother was having a lot of mental health issues and really could not cope. And the little kids at home were not getting fed. And so my life changed. I had to move home and become a commuter student and divide my evenings between working 30 hours a week because there wasn't any money and going to parent teacher conferences or making casseroles so the kids would have food the next day. I can tell you that it was an amazing learning experience. So sometimes adversity teaches you a lot of things. And remember what I said about academics. We always want to know what you learned from stuff. It's not, oh, feel sorry for me because I had adversity in my life. It's really more, this happened. This is what I wound up having to do. And here's what I learned from it. Here's why I think that that challenge has actually made me a stronger person. Um, we're looking for people who can be leaders. And as I said, holding leadership positions is one way to be a leader. There are a lot of other ways to be a leader. And the way that you approach difficulties and challenges, you in your workplace, if there has been a big problem with other coworkers, um, how did you approach trying to resolve the situation? Those are things that leaders do. So just because you've never held a leadership position doesn't mean you haven't developed leadership skills. So we're looking for all those kinds of qualities. And you probably have most, if not all of them. So I think the last couple things I want to say. One is, and I'll reiterate this, it's something I said before, you don't have to include every experience you ever had. One of the things that actually disturbs me a little bit about our undergrads is all the running around you guys do trying to check every box on your resume. I have to have the shadowing experiences. I have to have the volunteer experiences. I have to have the research experiences. I have to have. I tell students something different now. I tell them, don't run around and try and check every box. Do fewer things, but do them more deeply. So if you get involved in a research lab, stay in that lab, step up, start taking an active role in discussing the research projects, read the papers, get excited about what's going on in that lab, or whatever it is. that you are doing outside the classroom, do it more deeply, because then you do have the opportunity to learn from it. If you're only spending 3 weeks doing something, or one night doing something, or a semester doing something, you're probably not learning as much from it as you potentially could be. So think about that as well. What are the things that you've been involved in that have been the most impactful for you? Places where you really felt that you had an opportunity to grow, and what you learned from those things. And then the last thing about general personal statements is sometimes the prompt is written in a way where you're supposed to talk about why that institution that you are applying to is a place that you want to apply to. Why do you want to be there? Do your homework about the programs. If there is something particular at a program that you're super excited about, like maybe you totally want to do an AAC specialization and this program happens to offer it, by all means talk about, my excitement about the University of X stems at least in part from the fact that you have this truly outstanding specialization in AAC. And this is an area that I want to get deeply, deeply involved in my future career as a speech language pathologist. If you can talk about some things that their programs offer that will make an impression on the people reading the essay. Now, if it's just that everything about it looks good, you can also say, I don't know yet what my specialization or my particular interest in speech language pathology is. So far, throughout all my classes and experiences, I'm excited about all of it. That's okay too. Find programs that are great across the board, where you know you're going to get a broad education with a wide variety of clinical experiences. So do your homework about the program. So some of the schools, as I told you at the beginning, don't really ask for a complete personal essay. It's helpful to write one anyway, because you often will find that you can cannibalize pieces of it to answer particular essay prompts. So the essay prompts are going to be things related to your position on inclusivity. How have you demonstrated grit and resilience in your life? How have you demonstrated persistence and dedication and the ability to keep going when life has knocked you down? So, have you ever failed at anything and then had to get back up and try to succeed? What things about your progress through the major actually attest to academic excellence? Again, your GPA, it's just a number. And then, where have you had opportunities to exhibit leadership? And then there are some programs that will throw in, other strange questions. There was one that was famous for a long time, and I don't think any school ever asks this one anymore, but I'm going to tell you about it anyway. So here it is. There's a scenario that they write about. You're a speech language pathologist. You wake up in the morning, you have a client at 9 o'clock. You wake up at 7, and there has been a heavy snowfall overnight. What do you do? Now, most students would read that very superficially and say, well, what would they want me to say here? What do they want me to say? What should I say? Forget about that. The question's not about the snowstorm at all, right? Because you say, what should I say? I would move heaven and earth to get to my client's appointment on time. Well, guess what? No, you wouldn't. That isn't what you would do. not to be rude, but to tell you something memorable, this is not brain surgery. This is speech language pathology. And in fact, your client could maybe be having problems getting to the appointment anyway, and it might not be safe for them to be out on the roads. So what the question is really about is how you approach decision making. And many students don't ever get that far with the question. It's like, well, I know what I should do. I should say, I am so dedicated that I will always get to my appointment. Well, you might not. You might say, this is the reason why in the practice that I work for, we have set up telehealth options. So we'll do therapy over Zoom today. Good decision if you've set those things up. Or you might write, the first thing I would do is get more information. How much snow actually fell? Is there a snow emergency? I once had a student who said, what's a snow emergency? And I said, like, where are you from? Arizona? And she said, no, Ohio. And it's like, how could you not know what a snow emergency is? And a level 1 and a level 2 and a level 3. But she had never experienced that. So I said, well, I already know the answer to yours. Then you're going to write that I will never live outside walking distance to any workplace that I ever work for. That way, a snowstorm will not impact me. So it's about the decision process. What information do you gather? What risk benefit ratios do you consider? And how do those guide your decision process? This is a question about problem solving ability. It's not a question about snowstorms. I use that example because there are gonna be questions that may not be about what they look like they're about on the surface. So read the question carefully and say, why are they including this question? And what is it that they might really be asking? So ask yourself that question for the specific prompts that people are going to throw at you from these different schools. Finally, some schools are going to ask you questions about the future of speech language pathology or the future of audiology. What do you believe are the 3 biggest challenges facing speech pathology today? What do you think are the most exciting trends for the future in the field of audiology? Now, if you took my class last year or if you're in it this year, we talk about what are the most exciting future trends in audiology, right? That's how the profession is going to totally change during your lifetime as an audiologist. So those are questions where you might want to go out there and do a little homework and think about what are the biggest challenges facing our profession? What are the most exciting future trends? There are a ton of things you can write about for those questions. Okay, I am going to stop. And if people have questions, go ahead and hit the raise hand because I would be happy to answer anybody's questions. And we'll wait a second here to see if we have any questions. All right. Going once, going twice.
I'll ask a question.
Oh, go ahead, Ava. Hi,
Hi,
buddy.
and thank you for doing this. This has
Nice
been
to not,
very
yeah,
informative.
and nice to
So,
not exactly see you, but good to
oh
see you.
yeah, actually, here, I'll turn on my camera. It's like not dark. Well, maybe I won't turn on my camera because you can't actually see me. Hello? Okay, there we go.
Oh,
Okay,
there you
hi.
are. Hi.
Okay, so we talked a little bit about the resume versus the CV, which is like really
Mhm.
good to touch on because I really didn't feel like I knew about that because I read like probably 16 different articles about how to write
All right,
academic
your resume.
resume
Yeah.
or CV, but I didn't really understand that there was a difference in where a resume is going to be focusing more on a little bit of a detailed um summary of what you did and then kind of what you got out of that, where a CV is more strictly just what you got out of that.
And
So I guess I just wanted to touch up on, because some schools say to write a resume or a CV. Do you feel like there's a particular choice that might be more beneficial to just us as students trying to make it more academic focused?
almost all of you are going to be better off with a resume.
Okay.
So one of the things I do when I'm not teaching undergrads, so I've had some of you in 4440, and I've had some of you in the research methods class, and I've had some of you poor unfortunate people in both. But when I'm not teaching you guys, I teach the first year doctoral students, and we just did a whole session on, okay, you guys, you've been writing resumes all the way up to this point. Now it's time to create professional CVs. And their CVs are super short because what can they actually say? How many articles have they actually published when they're first year PhD students? Sometimes zero, right? So if you're just listing your position title and you're showing your publications, there's not going to be much on your CV. So for undergrads, it almost always is going to be better to do the resume because you guys have had a lot of different activities and no two of you look alike. So writing a short sentence or two or a couple of bullets about what your responsibilities were in that particular job or that particular volunteer experience or that particular leadership position, that's going to help us as academics understand the experiences that you've had, particularly because there's going to be some stuff on your resume that's not ever going to make it into your personal statement.
Okay.
So almost all of you should write resumes. I'd be surprised if any of you are on enough publications to make it worth doing an academic CV at this point in your life.
Okay.
But when I convince some of you to go on for the PhD after you've done your master's or your AUD, then we'll talk about writing professional CVs.
Okay. Awesome. Thank you.
That's a great question. People fret about the resume too. And it just needs to look like a business resume. You can have as many verbs in it as you want. It's a good thing.
Awesome. Thank you.
All right. And definitely do a resume. I know on at least last year, anyway, on the SIDCAST website, resumes were optional. Definitely do a resume because that's an opportunity for you to list other things that you've done that are not going to be part of your personal statement, as well as the things that are going to be part of your personal statement. All right. Other questions? All right, I'm seeing a lot of quiet people out there. Thank you guys. It's been great to have a chance to talk to you. Um, I hope that these sessions have been helpful for you. We certainly intend for them to be. We want you to spend that time thinking about yourself. What's your story? It turns out if you sit down and think about it that way, you're actually going to be kind of excited to go out and write it. And it's a really good opportunity to actually learn some things about yourself that maybe you've never thought about before. And it's always great to learn things about yourself. So go off and write outstanding personal statements. And I hope that all of you have a great rest of your evening. But we're going to go ahead and call it closed now.